the family who bought Unit 4. That's where this starts. Not with the building. Not with the penthouse. With the Garcias, Marco, his wife Adriana, their daughter Lily, age 9, who signed a 14-month lease on a 2-bedroom in October and were gone by November 3rd. Their furniture was still there. Their car was still in the garage. Their daughter's backpack was on the kitchen counter, homework half finished, a glass of milk beside it with a skin forming on the surface. And the leasing office had already processed their departure. Move-out inspection, passed. Security deposit, returned. Forwarding address, listed, verified, confirmed by the postal carrier who delivered their redirected mail to a house in Scottsdale that, when I checked, had been occupied by an elderly couple named Whalen for 19 years. I should explain what I do, and why any of this was my problem. My name is Nina Lasky. I'm 31. For the last 2 years, I've been the operations manager at the Belmore, a luxury residential complex in the Buckhead district of Atlanta. 22 stories. 184 units. Full amenity suite, pool, gym, theater room, co-working lounge, rooftop terrace. Monthly rents range from $3,200 for a studio to $14,000 for the penthouse on the 22nd floor. We have a concierge desk staffed 16 hours a day, a maintenance team of 6, a security team of 4, a leasing office with 2 agents, and me. I report to a property management company called Alder Residential, which operates 11 luxury buildings across the Southeast. Alder answers to the ownership group, a real estate investment trust called Peregrine Capital Partners, based in Chicago. I've never met anyone from Peregrine. I receive quarterly directives from Alder's regional VP, a woman named Sandra Chen, who visits the property twice a year and otherwise communicates by email with the warmth and specificity of a legally reviewed form letter. My job is everything between the residents and the structure. Move-ins, move-outs, maintenance coordination, vendor management, compliance reporting, incident documentation, amenity scheduling, noise complaints, package theft, parking disputes, elevator outages, water leaks, the slow diplomacy of 200 wealthy strangers sharing walls. I am good at it. I have been good at it for a long time, at 3 different properties, in 2 states. I understand the machinery of residential buildings the way some people understand engines, not just what each part does, but how the parts interact, where friction accumulates, what sounds wrong before anything breaks. The Belmore sounded wrong starting in August. Not mechanically. The building was in excellent condition, constructed in 2019, well-maintained, no deferred capital work. The wrongness was demographic. Statistical. A pattern in the move-out data that I noticed only because Alder requires monthly occupancy reports and I am the kind of person who reads what she submits. Between January and July 2024, the Belmore processed 23 move-outs. This was within normal range for a building our size, roughly 12% annual turnover, consistent with industry average for the luxury segment in Atlanta. Lease expirations, job relocations, the usual current of people flowing through expensive real estate. But 11 of those 23 move-outs were from the same unit. The penthouse. Unit 2201. 11 different tenancies, initiated and terminated, in 7 months. I pulled the records myself. Each lease had been executed by our leasing agent, Kenji Yamashita. Each had a signed application, a credit check, a move-in inspection, a deposit. Each tenant was a real person, verifiable name, verifiable employment, verifiable identity. Each had signed a 12-month lease. Each had terminated early, within 3 to 6 weeks of move-in, paying the early termination fee without dispute. 11 people had signed year-long leases on the most expensive unit in the building and left voluntarily within weeks. All of them. Without complaint. Without requesting maintenance. Without filing any kind of incident report. I asked Kenji about it on a Tuesday afternoon in August, in the leasing office, with both of us looking at the same screen. They just break the lease. They give 30 days notice, pay the fee, and go. It's in the lease terms. They're allowed to. All 11 of them. It's a popular unit. High visibility. The turnover makes it easier to keep it on the market at top rate. Sandra's actually happy about the revenue performance. We're pulling the lease break fee plus releasing income each cycle. But doesn't it seem unusual that no one stays? Kenji shrugged. Penthouse tenants are transient. Corporate relocations, short-term stays, people testing the market before buying. These aren't families. They're mobile. I accepted this for about a week. Then I started looking at the tenant profiles more carefully, because Kenji's characterization didn't match the applications. Tenant 1, January, a retired orthodontist from Birmingham, relocating permanently to be near grandchildren. 12-month lease. Left after 22 days. Tenant 3, March, a married couple, both professors at Georgia State, signed a 12-month lease after selling their house in Decatur. Left after 19 days. Tenant 7, May, a woman named Grace Okpara, senior VP at a logistics company headquartered 6 blocks from the Belmore. Her application listed the penthouse as her primary residence. She'd sold her previous home. She had nowhere else to go. She left after 26 days. These were not transient corporate relocators. These were people putting down roots. People who had made the penthouse their home. And then, within weeks, every single one of them decided it wasn't. I called Grace Okpara. Her number was in the file. Ms. Okpara, this is Nina Lasky, operations manager at the Belmore. I'm doing a routine follow-up on your recent residency. I just wanted to ask, was there anything about the unit that prompted your early departure? Silence. Not the hostile silence of someone offended by the question. A thoughtful silence. No, she said. It was a beautiful apartment. Was there a maintenance issue? Noise. Anything with the neighbors? No. Nothing like that. Can I ask what made you decide to leave? Another silence, longer this time. I just didn't want to be there anymore. Can you elaborate? No, she said. I don't think I can. She wasn't being evasive. She sounded like someone trying to describe a color she couldn't name. Like the reason existed but wouldn't translate into language. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called 3 more former tenants. 2 didn't answer. The third, the retired orthodontist, said almost exactly the same thing. Beautiful unit. Wonderful building. I just decided it wasn't for me. After 22 days. Sometimes you know quickly. He'd moved into a much smaller apartment in Hoover, Alabama. 40 minutes from his grandchildren instead of 20. He'd broken a lease and paid thousands of dollars in fees to live in a worse apartment farther from the people he'd moved to be near. And he couldn't tell me why. I filed a maintenance request for the penthouse on August 14th. This was unusual. Operations managers don't typically file maintenance requests, tenants do, but I wanted to get inside 2201 between tenancies and see it for myself. The unit was vacant, the 11th tenant having departed 3 days prior. The 12th hadn't been placed yet. I submitted the request as a routine pre-leasing inspection, HVAC check, plumbing pressure test, appliance verification, general condition assessment. Standard procedure between tenants. I assigned it to Ray Dominguez, our senior maintenance tech, and scheduled it for the following morning. Ray and I rode the elevator to 22 together. The hallway on the penthouse level was quieter than the rest of the building, only one unit on the floor, so no neighbor doors, no hallway traffic, just a long corridor with high-quality carpet and recessed lighting leading to a single entrance. Ray unlocked the door with his master key. We stepped inside. The penthouse was 2,400 square feet. Open floor plan with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 exposures, a gourmet kitchen with marble countertops and a 6-burner range, a primary suite with a spa bathroom, a second bedroom, a study, and a private terrace overlooking the Buckhead skyline. The finishes were immaculate. The afternoon light poured in from the south-facing windows and lit the space like a showroom. It was beautiful. It was also, as far as I could tell, perfectly normal. Ray checked the HVAC system, ran water in every sink and shower, tested the range, inspected the dishwasher and washer-dryer, checked the windows for seal integrity, and documented everything on his tablet. Everything passed. No deficiencies. No odors, no stains, no damage. The unit was in better condition than most apartments I've seen after a single 30-day tenancy. Whatever was making people leave, it wasn't mechanical. I stood in the living room while Ray finished in the primary bathroom. The silence was notable, not eerie, not heavy, just the particular deep quiet of a high-floor corner unit with quality insulation and no upstairs neighbor. I could hear the faint hum of the building's mechanical systems, the almost subliminal vibration of the elevator shaft on the other side of the corridor wall. I walked to the windows. The view was exceptional. South toward Midtown, west toward the interstate corridor, north toward the low green hills of Sandy Springs. On a clear day you could probably see Stone Mountain. I felt fine. Comfortable. The unit was warm from the sunlight but not stuffy. The air smelled clean. If anything, I felt slightly too comfortable, the kind of ease that makes you want to sit down, stay a while, not rush back to the office. All good. I asked Ray when he came out. Flawless, he said. Honestly, it's the cleanest unit in the building. Whoever's been turning it over between tenants is doing a better job than I would. I noted that. We'd been using our standard cleaning vendor, Pristine Pro, for all unit turns. I made a mental note to check whether the penthouse had been getting additional or different service. We left. I locked the door. Ray filed his inspection report, all systems nominal, no action required. I countersigned it and uploaded it to Alder's portal. That night, at home in my own apartment on the 14th floor, I pulled the Pristine Pro invoices for 2201. We used them for every unit turn in the building. Their invoices were standardized: date, unit number, service type, hours, cost. There were no invoices for Unit 2201. Not for any of the 11 turnovers. I checked the maintenance log. Ray's inspection from that afternoon was there, time-stamped and filed. But when I searched the maintenance history for 2201 going back to January, there was nothing else. No work orders. No vendor visits. No cleaning appointments. 11 tenants had moved in and out of the penthouse, and not once had the unit been professionally cleaned, inspected, or maintained between occupancies. Someone was preparing the unit. But it wasn't us. I brought this to Kenji the next morning. Who's turning over the penthouse between tenants? He looked at me blankly. Pristine Pro. There are no invoices. That can't be right. I checked last night. There's nothing. No cleaning invoices, no maintenance tickets, nothing between any of the 11 occupancies. Kenji pulled up his own records. He had a move-out checklist for each tenant, the standard form we used for every departure. Inspection date, condition notes, deposit disposition, vendor assignment for the turn. On each of the 11 checklists, the vendor assignment field said, Pristine Pro, scheduled. But when he cross-referenced the Pristine Pro master schedule, the penthouse wasn't on it. It had never been on it. I must have forgotten to confirm, he said. 11 times. You forgot 11 times. Look, maybe they're invoicing Alder directly. Sometimes Sandra handles penthouse-level expenses separately. I emailed Sandra Chin that afternoon. Her response came back 2 hours later, 3 sentences. The penthouse turn schedule is managed at the property level per standard protocol. Please coordinate with your vendor. Let me know if there's a billing discrepancy I should escalate. She hadn't arranged anything. Kenji hadn't arranged anything. Pristine Pro hadn't been there. And yet the unit was spotless. Ray had called it the cleanest unit in the building. I went back up to 2201 that evening, alone, after the concierge desk closed. The hallway was silent. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The unit was different. Not wrong. Not damaged. Different. The light was different. It was 7 p.m., the sun was setting, and the western windows were catching it, painting the walls in deep amber. But it wasn't just the light. The space felt occupied. Not in the sense that someone was there. I was alone, I was certain of that, but in the sense that the room remembered being lived in. The air had a texture to it, a warmth that wasn't thermal. The kitchen counter had a faint ring where a coffee mug might have sat, except the marble was clean when I looked directly at it. I walked through slowly. Checked every room. Opened every closet. The unit was empty. No furniture, no personal items, no signs of habitation. But the primary bedroom smelled like lavender. Not strongly, just the faint residual scent, the kind that lingers in a room where someone has been using a particular soap or lotion for weeks. It was specific. Personal. And it hadn't been there during the morning inspection with Ray. I stood in the bedroom and breathed. Lavender. I checked the bathroom. Clean. Empty. No soap, no shampoo, no residue. The scent had no source. I left the penthouse at 7:34 p.m. I locked the door. I went downstairs and pulled the building's access log for the 22nd floor. My entry at 7:02 p.m. was recorded. So was another entry at 3:17 p.m. No name. No badge number. The system logged it as a valid access. The elevator had stopped on 22, the hallway motion sensor had activated, the door lock on 2201 had registered an unlock event, but there was no credential attached. The access was anonymous. I checked the elevator camera for 3:17 p.m. The footage showed the elevator arriving on 22. The doors opened. No one exited. The doors stayed open for 8 seconds, then closed. The elevator returned to the lobby. The motion sensor on 22 remained active for another 14 minutes. Something had entered the hallway and the penthouse without being visible on camera and without carrying a registered credential. It had stayed for 14 minutes. And when I visited 3.5 hours later, the unit smelled like a person who wasn't there. The 12th tenant moved into 2201 on August 28th. Her name was Marguerite Talbot. 67 years old. Retired federal judge. She'd relocated from Washington, D.C. after her husband's death, choosing Atlanta because her son lived in Decatur and she wanted proximity without intrusion. She was precise, dignified, and polite in a way that made clear she expected the same from everyone around her. She signed a 12-month lease. She paid the full year up front. I liked her immediately. I also watched her move in with a knot in my stomach, because I was now certain that something about the penthouse was wrong, and I had let another person move into it. I told myself I had no evidence that the previous tenants had been harmed. They'd left voluntarily, in good health, with their deposits returned. No complaints, no incidents. Whatever was happening in 2201 was producing departure, not damage. People simply stopped wanting to be there. But the Garcias in Unit 4 had left their daughter's homework on the counter. And I hadn't yet reconciled that. I decided to do something I'd never done in my career. I began monitoring a specific tenant without their knowledge. Not invasively, I didn't enter her unit or access her personal information beyond what was already in her file. But I watched the building systems. I checked the access log for the 22nd floor every morning. I noted the times she left and returned. I kept a private record on my personal laptop, not the Alder system, tracking the penthouse's data day by day. For the first 2 weeks, nothing unusual. Marguerite came and went on a regular schedule, morning walks, afternoon errands, evening dinners with her son. She used the gym 3 times a week. She reserved the theater room once. She was a model resident. The access log for 22 showed only her entries and exits. No anonymous accesses. No unexplained motion sensor activations. Whatever had visited the penthouse on August 14th did not return, or, I realized, might simply not be visiting while the unit was occupied. On September 11th, 14 days into her tenancy, Marguerite stopped me in the lobby. "Nina, I have an odd question." "Of course. Has anyone else lived in my unit recently?" I felt the knot tighten. It was previously occupied, yes. Standard turnover. How recently? The previous tenant moved out in early August. Only one previous tenant. I hesitated. For the most recent occupancy, yes. She studied me with the same measured attention I imagined she'd used on attorneys who tried to slide something past her bench. "I find things," she said. "What kind of things?" "Small things. A hairpin behind the bathroom mirror, not mine, wrong color. A stain on the inside of a kitchen cabinet that I cleaned last week and has returned. A scuff on the bedroom wall at a height consistent with a headboard, which I don't have. Those could be from the previous tenant. Sometimes cleaning misses. I've found 11 hairpins." I didn't say anything. 11. All different. Different colors, different styles, different materials. Not collected in one place, distributed throughout the unit. Behind the mirror. Inside the medicine cabinet. Under the bathroom floor tile that's slightly loose in the corner. Inside the paper towel holder. In the track of the sliding closet door. 11 hairpins belonging to what appear to be 11 different women. She opened her purse and produced a small Ziploc bag. Inside were 11 hairpins, arranged in a row. They were all different: brass, black, tortoiseshell, rhinestone-studded, plain brown, silver, matte black, rose gold, wooden, enamel floral, white pearl. 11 hairpins. 11 previous tenants. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," Marguerite said. "I'm a tidy person and I notice details. But these weren't left casually. Some of them were hidden in places that required effort to reach. The one behind the floor tile was underneath the tile, in the substrate. Someone had to lift the tile to place it there. I took the bag. I told her I would investigate with our cleaning vendor and follow up. I went back to my office and sat with the bag on my desk for a long time. Then I pulled the tenant files for all 11 previous occupants of 2201. 6 were women. 5 were men. 11 hairpins. All different. All apparently belonging to different women. But only 6 of the previous tenants were women, which meant at least 5 of the hairpins didn't correspond to any known resident of the unit. Unless they weren't from the tenants at all. I called Pristine Pro and asked them to send a 2-person team for a deep inspection of the penthouse, not a cleaning, an inspection. I wanted them to document every anomaly, every imperfection, every object or mark or scent that shouldn't be in a recently turned luxury unit. They came on September 14th, while Marguerite was at her son's house for the weekend. I let them in with my master key and waited in the living room while they worked. It took them 4 hours. Their report was 12 pages long. In a unit that Ray Dominguez had declared flawless 3 weeks earlier, Pristine Pro found the following: 37 hair strands in various locations, embedded in grout, caught in window seals, pressed between cabinet shelf paper and the shelf itself. DNA testing would later show they came from at least 14 distinct individuals. A partial fingerprint on the inside of the oven door, positioned where a person's hand would rest if they were looking into the oven while it was open, at a height consistent with a child. A faint but measurable temperature differential in the primary bedroom, 2.3 degrees warmer than the rest of the unit, with no HVAC explanation. The differential was consistent across 3 separate measurements taken an hour apart. The lavender scent, which had returned, strongest in the bedroom closet. And, most disturbingly, a series of faint marks on the inside of the entry door. Not scratches, indentations, pressed into the wood from the inside, as though someone had leaned against the door for long periods. The marks were at varying heights, some at adult head level, some lower, some much lower. Child height. The Pristine Pro team lead, a woman named Jackie who'd been doing this for 15 years, stood with me in the entry hallway and pointed at the marks. "These aren't damage from moving furniture," she said. "These are body impressions. People standing here, leaning on this door, for a long time. Dozens of people, from the variation in height and position. Dozens. I've seen this once before, in a panic room situation, a family who locked themselves in a closet during a home invasion and pressed against the door for hours. The wood deformed slightly under sustained body pressure. But that was a soft pine closet door. This is a reinforced steel core entry door with a hardwood veneer. To make these impressions, someone would have to lean against it for days. Weeks, maybe." She paused. "Or a lot of people would have to lean against it for a shorter time." I looked at the marks. They covered the entire interior surface of the door, from about 18 inches off the floor to just above 6 feet. Hundreds of faint impressions, overlapping, creating a subtle topography that was invisible from more than a few feet away but unmistakable up close. "One more thing," Jackie said. She walked me to the living room windows. "The southern exposure, the one with the best view. Put your face close to the glass. Breathe on it." I did. My breath fogged a small circle on the window. Around my fog, dozens of other fog circles appeared. Not from my breath. From residual traces of breath already on the glass, old exhalations, trapped in the microscopic surface texture, invisible until another breath activated them. The window bloomed with overlapping circles of condensation at varying heights, in varying sizes, covering the entire pane. People had stood at this window. Many people. Pressing close, breathing on the glass, looking out at the city. For a long time. In a unit that had been professionally cleaned between each of 11 tenancies. Except it hadn't been professionally cleaned. No one had cleaned it. And yet it was spotless every time, except for the things that wouldn't leave. I presented the Pristine Pro report to Sandra Chen by email on September 16, with the inspection photos attached. I framed it as a maintenance concern, possible unauthorized access, evidence of prior occupancy not consistent with the documented tenant history, recommendation for a forensic cleaning and lock change. Sandra's response came back in 19 minutes. "Thank you for the thorough report. I've forwarded to ownership for review. Please do not share this documentation with the current tenant or any staff. Alder will handle the follow-up directly." 2 days later, I received a second email from Sandra. It contained a single attachment, a PDF titled, Unit 2201, Historical Occupancy Memorandum. The memo was on Peregrine Capital Partners letterhead. It was dated 4 months before the Belmore was built. The memo described the land parcel at the Belmore's address. Before the building was constructed, the site had been occupied by a residential property called the Grandison, a 14-unit boarding house that operated from 1952 to 2017, when it was demolished to make way for the Belmore's construction. The Grandison had been unremarkable. A well-run boarding house in a neighborhood that gentrified around it over 6 decades. It housed working professionals, students, retirees. It was managed by a single family, the Burkes, across 3 generations. The memo noted that during demolition, the construction crew had discovered that the top-floor unit of the Grandison, a large corner room that occupied the same footprint as the Belmore's penthouse, had been continuously occupied for 65 years. Not by the same person. By a succession of tenants, one after another, without a single gap in occupancy. 65 years of someone always being in that room. The memo did not say this was unusual. It presented it as a historical footnote. But attached to the memo was a second document, a scanned page from the Grandison's tenant ledger, handwritten in careful cursive. The page covered 1987 to 1994. In the margin, next to the top-floor room's entry, someone had written in different ink. "She won't leave until someone else comes. Then she leaves and the new one won't leave until someone else comes." It goes on. We don't talk about it. The room keeps them and gives them back and keeps the next one. Below that, in yet another hand. It's not the room. It's what was here before the room. I read the memo and the ledger page 3 times. Then I called Sandra. What was here before the Grandison? I don't have that information. The memo implies something predates the boarding house. The memo provides the historical context that ownership felt was relevant. If you need further context, you can submit a request through the standard research channel. Sandra, I have a current tenant in that unit. A 67-year-old woman who's finding physical evidence of people who shouldn't have been there. Has the tenant filed a formal complaint? Not yet. Then there's no action item. If she does, route it through the standard process. Alder will review. She hung up. I sat at my desk and reread the ledger annotation. It keeps them and gives them back and keeps the next one. Marguerite called me on September 19, 22 days into her tenancy. Her voice was the same measured tone, but underneath it I heard something I recognized from Grace Ochbra's voice, the sound of someone trying to articulate an experience that resisted language. Nina, I'd like to discuss something in person. I met her in the lobby at 3 p.m. We sat in the co-working lounge, which was empty. I'm not going to break my lease, she said, as though preempting a question I hadn't asked. I want to be clear about that. I paid for a year and I intend to stay. Of course. But I need to tell someone what's happening, and you seem like the appropriate person. She folded her hands on the table. The apartment is occupied when I'm not in it. What do you mean? I mean that when I leave, for any duration, even an hour, and return, there are signs of habitation. Not damage. Not theft. Habitation. The throw pillow on the couch has an impression in it. The soap in the bathroom is slightly more used. The bed, which I make every morning, has a wrinkle on the side I don't sleep on. Small things. Impossible to photograph convincingly. But consistent, and daily. Have you seen anyone? No. And I've tried. I've set up my phone to record video while I'm out. The footage shows nothing. The apartment is empty the entire time I'm gone. But when I return, the signs are there. The pillow. The soap. The wrinkle. She paused. And the breathing. Breathing. On the windows. I clean them every morning. By evening, there are breath marks. Not mine, I don't stand at the windows. I sit in my reading chair, which faces the opposite direction. But someone is standing at my windows while I'm in the room and breathing on the glass, and I cannot see them. I thought about the dozens of fog circles Jackie and I had activated with a single breath. There's one more thing, Marguerite said. I've begun hearing my husband's voice. I didn't respond. Gerald died 14 months ago. I know what his voice sounds like. I know I am not hallucinating. And 3 nights ago, at approximately 2 a.m., I heard him say my name from the hallway outside my bedroom door. Once. Clearly. In the tone he used when he wanted to tell me something but wasn't sure I was awake. Her composure was absolute. She was not frightened. She was reporting. I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The apartment was empty. But the air in the hallway was warm, warmer than it should have been, and it smelled like pipe tobacco. Gerald smoked a pipe for 40 years. She looked at me. Nina, I'm not going to ask you what's happening. I don't think you know. But I am going to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer. All right. How many people have heard someone they lost in that apartment? I didn't have data on that. None of the 11 previous tenants had reported anything like it. But none of them had stayed long enough to be asked the right questions, either. They'd simply left, unable to explain why, carrying a reason that wouldn't translate into language. I don't know, I said. You're the first person to describe this to me. She nodded, satisfied. Not with the answer, with the honesty. "I'm staying," she said again. Whatever this is, it knew Gerald. And I would like to understand how. I spent the next week doing something that felt, for the first time in my career, like a violation of my professional responsibilities. I researched the tenants. Not the 11 penthouse tenants. All of them, every person who had moved out of the Belmore in 2024, across all units. 23 departures through July, plus the Garcias in October. I tracked them down through forwarding addresses, emergency contacts, social media, public records. I called 12 of them. 9 answered. I asked each one the same question, framed as a satisfaction survey. Was there anything about your experience at the Belmore that you found difficult to explain? 3 said no. 6 said yes. The 6 yes were cautious, halting, embarrassed. They described experiences that shared a common architecture but differed in specific content. One man heard his dead mother singing in his bathroom. A woman found her childhood cat's collar, a specific collar, the right color and tag, in her dresser drawer, 30 years after the cat had died. A couple reported that their wedding photographs, displayed on a shelf in their living room, had gained an additional person, a woman neither of them recognized, standing in the background of every shot, smiling. The photographs returned to normal when they moved out. These tenants were not in the penthouse. They were in units across the building, floors 6, 9, 12, 14, 17. Different wings. Different exposures. The phenomenon was not specific to 2201. It was in the building. Or, remembering the ledger annotation, it was in what was under the building. I submitted a property research request through Alder's standard channel on September 29. I asked for the complete land use history of the Belmore's parcel, including anything predating the Grandison boarding house. The response came from Peregrine directly, the first time ownership had communicated with me without Sandra as an intermediary. It was a one-page letter on Peregrine letterhead, and signed, with no contact information. Ms. Lasky, thank you for your inquiry. The information you've requested is maintained in a restricted archive and is not available through the standard research channel. We appreciate your diligence in managing the property. Please note that Unit 2201's accelerated turnover rate has been incorporated into our financial model and does not require operational intervention. We encourage you to continue providing excellent service to current residents and to route any tenant concerns through the established process. The building is performing as expected. Performing as expected. 11 tenancies in 7 months. A retired judge hearing her dead husband's voice. Breath marks on windows from people who aren't there. Body impressions on a steel core door. Hair from 14 individuals in a unit occupied by 1. And ownership considered this expected performance. I read the letter 3 more times. Then I read the critical sentence again. Unit 2201's accelerated turnover rate has been incorporated into our financial model. They weren't ignoring the penthouse's turnover. They'd budgeted for it. The lease break fees, the releasing income, the constant cycling, it was a revenue feature, not a problem. Peregrine knew. Alder knew. The penthouse was designed to lose tenants. The unit was a trap with a revolving door, and every departure generated income. But that didn't explain why. What was the building doing with the people while they were in it? Why did they leave? What were the breath marks, the hairpins, the scent of lavender, the voice of a dead man? I went back to the Peregrine memo. The ledger annotation. It keeps them and gives them back. Keeps what? On October 3, 20 days before the Garcias disappeared from Unit 4, I went back to the penthouse while Marguerite was out. I used my master key. I told no one. I brought a thermometer, a voice recorder, my phone, and the Pristine Pro report for reference. The unit was warm. Not uncomfortably, maybe 74 degrees, slightly above the thermostat's 71 degrees setting. The lavender scent was present, faint but definite. The windows were marked with breath circles I could just barely see in the afternoon light. I set the voice recorder on the kitchen counter and turned it on. I walked through the apartment slowly, room by room, saying nothing. In the primary bedroom, the temperature differential was still present, 2.3 degrees warmer than the rest of the unit, exactly matching the Pristine Pro measurement from 3 weeks ago. The closet smelled like lavender. Marguerite's clothes hung on one side. The other side was empty. I stood in the closet and waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. After about 3 minutes, the air shifted. Not a breeze, the air conditioning wasn't running. A shift, like the room had exhaled. The lavender scent intensified, briefly, then faded. And in the moment of intensification, I felt something I cannot describe accurately but will try, a feeling of being recognized. Not watched, recognized. As though the room, or something in it, had been waiting for someone to stand still long enough to be noticed, and now that I had, it was acknowledging me the way you acknowledge a neighbor in an elevator. A brief, polite awareness. Then it was gone. I left the closet, retrieved my recorder, and went back to my office. I played the recording back. 42 minutes of ambient room sound, the hum of the building, the faint traffic from far below, my own footsteps. And, at the 31:14 mark, corresponding to the moment I'd been standing in the closet, a sound. Not a voice. Not breathing. A sound like fabric settling. Like someone sitting down on a bed or shifting their weight in a chair. A small, domestic, human sound. In an empty room. I played it 4 times. The sound was clear, unambiguous, and impossible to mistake for mechanical noise. Someone had been in the closet with me. Marguerite Talbot did not break her lease. By mid-October, she had been in the penthouse for 47 days, longer than any of the 11 previous tenants. She seemed settled. Content, even. She mentioned Gerald's voice casually, as though it had become a feature of her evenings rather than a disturbance. He tells me about his day, she said, when I asked how she was doing. That's what it sounds like. I can't make out the words, but the cadence is right. The rhythm of how he used to talk when he came home from Chambers. He'd sit in his chair and just narrate. The weather, the arguments he'd heard, what he wanted for dinner. I don't hear the words now. Just the shape of them. And that doesn't frighten you. She looked at me with something close to pity. Nina, I moved here because he was gone. If some part of this building can give me back the shape of him, I'll stay as long as it lets me. I thought about the ledger annotation again. It keeps them and gives them back. Maybe what it kept wasn't the tenants. Maybe what it kept was everything the tenants had lost. Every person they'd grieved. Every voice they missed. Maybe the building, or whatever was under it, collected lost the way a foundation collects groundwater, and what it offered back was proximity to the dead. And maybe the 11 tenants who left had encountered their dead and couldn't bear it. And Marguerite, who could, was the first one to stay. I was thinking about this on October 28 when the Garcias vanished from Unit 4. And I was forced to consider a different possibility, that the building didn't just offer proximity to the dead. that it made the proximity permanent. The Garcias' belongings were in their apartment. Their car was in the garage. Their daughter's homework was on the counter. They were simply gone, with a file that said they'd left voluntarily and a forwarding address that led to strangers. I searched the building systems. The Garcias' last registered access was October 27 at 8:14 p.m., a key card entry to the 4th floor. After that, nothing. No elevator use, no lobby camera footage, no garage exit. They'd entered the building and never left. But they weren't in their apartment. And they weren't in the building. I checked every common area, every storage room, every mechanical space. I had Ray walk every floor. Nothing. Except that when I checked the access log for the 22nd floor, there was an entry at 11:47 p.m. on October 27th. No credential. Anonymous access, just like the one from August. The motion sensor on 22 activated and remained active for 6 hours. I pulled the elevator camera footage for 11:47 p.m. The elevator arrived on 22. The doors opened. 3 people exited. A man, a woman, and a small girl. They were blurred. Not blurred in the way of a technical malfunction, their edges were soft, as though the camera couldn't quite decide where they ended and the hallway began. But they were clearly people. They walked down the corridor toward the penthouse. The man put his hand on the girl's shoulder as they walked. The woman carried a bag. They reached the door of 2201. It opened from the inside. Warm light spilled into the hallway for a moment. They stepped through. The door closed. The Garcias had gone to the penthouse. And the penthouse had opened for them. I checked the current occupancy records. Marguerite was home that night. She was inside when the door opened. But the footage showed no sign of her, only the warm light, and the 3 soft-edged figures walking through. I went upstairs. It was 6 a.m. on November 3rd. I knocked on 2201. Marguerite opened the door. She was in a bathrobe, holding a cup of tea. The apartment behind her was sunlit and quiet. Nina. Good morning. Marguerite, did anything unusual happen on the night of October 27th? No. I went to bed early. Gerald was particularly talkative that evening, so I stayed up until about 10, listening. Did anyone come to your door? No. Did you hear anything in the hallway? No. Why? I looked past her into the apartment. It was exactly as I expected, clean, warm, filled with afternoon light even though it was morning. The windows were marked with breath circles. The air smelled faintly of lavender and, underneath it, something else. Pipe tobacco. And something new. Something small and sharp and specific. Crayons. Marguerite, do you own any crayons? She looked at me as though the question didn't quite make sense. No. Why would I? I thanked her and left. That afternoon, I went into the leasing office and pulled up Unit 2201's current record. Marguerite Talbot was listed as the sole occupant, lease term 12 months, prepaid in full. Below her name, in a field I had never seen before, a field that did not exist in any other unit's record, was a line labeled retained. The number beside it was 4. It had been 0 when I'd last checked, the day before the Garcias disappeared. I scrolled down. Below retained was another field, capacity. The number was 312. I stared at those two fields for a very long time. Then I went to the building's master occupancy record, the one I submitted to Alder monthly, and looked at the total unit count. 184 units. Capacity, 312. The building had 184 apartments. But the system believed it could hold 312 people. And 4 of them were already retained. I closed the screen. I sat in the dark office. Outside, the building hummed. The elevator rose and fell. 200 people slept, ate, watched television, called their families, lived their lives inside a structure that was counting them against a number they would never see. And somewhere on the 22nd floor, a retired judge was listening to her dead husband describe his day while the smell of crayons drifted through a room where no child had ever lived. The system marked the Garcia file as resolved. I am the only person who checked. And last night, for the first time, when I came home to my own apartment on the 14th floor, I found a single hairpin on my bathroom counter. It was my mother's. She's been dead for 6 years. I picked it up. It was warm. I held it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. The metal was the old-fashioned kind, thin, slightly bent at the tip where she used to pry it open with her teeth. She'd worn them every day, 2 on each side, pulling her hair back from her face while she cooked. I hadn't seen one since we cleaned out her apartment in Savannah. I'd thrown them all away. I remember doing it. I remember the small ceramic dish on her bathroom counter where she kept them, and I remember dumping the dish into a trash bag and feeling nothing because I was too exhausted to feel anything, and there were still 14 rooms left to empty. This was one of hers. I don't mean it was similar. I mean it was hers, the same slightly tarnished brass, the same faint curve from years of being bent and rebent, the same brand stamp on the flat side that I could feel under my thumb without looking. I set it on the counter. I went to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning, it was still there. I photographed it. I put it in an envelope. I put the envelope in my desk drawer at the office, and I did not open the drawer again for 3 days. During those 3 days, the retained field in 2201 system record changed twice. November 4th, 4. November 5th, 6. November 6th, 6. 2 more people. I pulled the move-out records. A man named Denisier, Unit 1508, had officially departed on November 4th. His paperwork was flawless, 30-day notice served, deposit returned, forwarding address on file. His car was not in the garage. His unit was empty. Everything about his departure looked normal. Except that I'd seen Denisier in the gym at 6 a.m. on November 4th, the date of his documented departure. He'd been on the treadmill, wearing his usual earbuds, watching a basketball game on the mounted television. I'd nodded to him as I passed through on my morning walk through. He'd nodded back. At 6 a.m., his departure had already been processed. The system had him gone before I watched him run. The second addition was a woman named Risa Mori, Unit 702. Her departure was logged on November 5th. I hadn't interacted with her directly, but when I checked the lobby cameras, she was captured on footage entering the building at 9:22 p.m. on November 4th, walking in. Not out. She entered, took the elevator to 7, and that was her last recorded movement. Her unit, when maintenance inspected it, was empty. Her car was in the garage. Her departure file was complete and unremarkable. 6 retained. Out of a capacity the system said was 312. I began checking the retained field every morning. I built a spreadsheet on my personal laptop, date, number, any corresponding move-out that matched the increment. The field didn't change every day. Sometimes it held steady for a week. Then it would tick up by 1 or 2, and I'd find the paperwork already filed, already closed, already perfect. By November 20th, the count was 9. I mapped the departures against the building's population. The Belmore had 184 units. At standard occupancy, that was roughly 280 residents, singles, couples, a few families. The 9 retained represented about 3% of the building's population, gone in less than a month. The leasing office was already filling the vacancies. Kenji had waiting lists. Alder was pleased with the revenue. Nobody noticed the pattern because there was no institutional mechanism designed to detect it. Move-outs are normal. Turnover is expected. Each individual departure was unremarkable. It was only the aggregate, and the retained field, that revealed what was happening. I could not find the retained field in any Alder system documentation. It wasn't in the property management software's standard configuration. When I asked Kenji whether he'd seen it, he pulled up the same unit record and stared at his screen. "I don't have that field," he said. "It's right here on mine." I showed him my screen. He looked at it, looked at his, looked at mine again. "That's not on my version, Nina." He was right. His screen showed the standard record, tenant name, lease term, deposit status, contact information. No retained field. No capacity field. The fields existed only on my terminal. I logged into the system from his computer using my credentials. The fields appeared. I logged out, had him log in with his own credentials on the same machine. They vanished. The system was showing me something it wasn't showing anyone else. I should have escalated. I know that. There are channels for this: Alder's compliance department, the building's ownership liaison, external authorities if necessary. A responsible operations manager who discovers residents are disappearing through documentation that manufactures their departure contacts someone with the power to investigate. But I had contacted Sandra. I had contacted Peregrine. The institution's response had been consistent: this was expected performance. The building was working as designed. And the only evidence I had, the retained field, the capacity number, the access logs showing anonymous entries, existed exclusively on screens that only I could see. If I reported it externally, I would be a property manager claiming her residents were vanishing into an invisible system embedded in the building's software. I would sound, at best, delusional. At worst, complicit. And there was the hairpin. My mother's hairpin, sitting in my desk drawer, warm when I'd found it and still slightly warm every time I checked. As though it had just been removed from someone's hair. The building wasn't just taking residents. It was reaching into me. Personally. Specifically. Placing an object that only I would recognize, from a person only I had lost, in a location that told me I was already inside whatever this was. I want to describe what that knowledge felt like, because I think it matters. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like gravity, a constant, directionless pull that wasn't asking me to do anything, wasn't threatening anything, was simply present. The building was aware of me the way I was aware of it. We had been working together for 2 years. I knew its sounds, its rhythms, its mechanical heartbeat. And now it was demonstrating that it knew mine. On November 22nd, I visited Marguerite. I didn't call ahead. I knocked on her door at 10 a.m., and when she opened it, the apartment behind her had changed. Not structurally. The walls, the floors, the windows were the same. But the space was full. Not full of furniture, Marguerite's furniture was where it had always been. Full of presence. The air had weight. The light coming through the south-facing windows was thick and golden, the kind of light that exists in memory rather than in real atmospheric conditions, the light of a late afternoon you remember from childhood but could never photograph. The apartment smelled like a dozen different lives. Lavender, pipe tobacco, crayons, coffee, lemon floor polish, sandalwood, something floral I couldn't name. The scents didn't compete. They coexisted, layered on top of each other, as though the air had been accumulating personal histories and could hold them all simultaneously. Marguerite looked well. Better than well. She looked 10 years younger than the woman who'd moved in 3 months ago. Her posture was straighter, her skin was clearer, her eyes had a brightness that hadn't been there in September. "Come in," she said. I stepped inside. The warmth enveloped me immediately, not the dry warmth of overactive heating, but the ambient warmth of a room where people have been gathered for hours. Body heat. Living warmth. The apartment felt like Thanksgiving dinner at the point where everyone has eaten and the conversation has gone soft and the house is holding all of you together. "You feel it," Marguerite said. It wasn't a question. "How many?" I asked. She tilted her head, as though the question amused her. "I stopped counting in October. It doesn't work like that, anyway. They're not separate. Not the way you'd think. Gerald isn't standing in the corner waiting for me. He's in the air. In the walls. In the way the light moves. They all are. The Garcias are here. A family arrived, yes. I don't know their names. But there's a child now. I hear her sometimes, in the hallway, not words, just the sound a child makes when she's concentrating on something. That focused breathing. It's lovely. I thought about Lily Garcia's homework, left half-finished on her kitchen counter. The glass of milk with the skin forming. Marguerite, do you understand what's happening? Better than you, I think. These are real people. They had lives. Families. Jobs. They didn't choose to be here. She was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down in her reading chair, the one that faced away from the windows, and folded her hands the way she had in the lobby, weeks ago, when she'd told me about Gerald's voice. "Nina, I was a federal judge for 27 years. I made decisions about people's lives every day. Custody, sentencing, deportation. I learned something in that work that most people never have to confront, the difference between what is wrong and what can be helped." She looked at me steadily. "The building is a place. It has been a place for a long time, longer than the Grandison, longer than whatever was here before that. It collects. That's what it does. Not maliciously. Not purposefully. The way a river collects sediment. The way a house collects warmth. People come, and some part of them stays, and eventually enough parts have stayed that the staying becomes substantial. Real. And now what stayed is reaching out to what's still here, and some of what's still here is reaching back. The Garcias didn't reach back. They were taken. Were they? Their daughter's homework was on the counter. They left in the middle of a normal evening. And the system says they departed voluntarily. The system is fabricating their departure. Is it? Or is it recording what happened in the only language it has? People left their unit and went somewhere else in the building. The system calls that a move out. The system isn't lying. It just doesn't have a category for where they actually went. I stared at her. She was calm. She was rational. She was explaining the disappearance of a family, including a 9-year-old girl, with the composed pragmatism of someone who had spent decades managing the gap between law and justice. "You're not going to help me stop this," I said. "No. Because I don't experience it as something that needs to be stopped. I experience it as a reunion. And I understand that my experience is not the only valid one. But I'm staying, Nina. This is where Gerald is. This is where I'll be." I left. On December 1st, the retained count was 14. 2 weeks later, it was 19. The departures were accelerating, and I was the only person tracking them because I was the only person the system had chosen to inform. I want to be precise about that word, chosen. The retained field appeared on my terminal and no one else's. The Peregrine memo arrived in my inbox and no one else's. The hairpin appeared on my counter and no one else's. Whatever the building was, it had selected me as its, I don't know. Its witness. Its administrator. Its operations manager, in the fullest and most terrible sense of that title. I began doing rounds at night. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I needed to see the building in its other state, the one it showed after the concierge desk closed and the lobby went quiet and the elevators settled into their slow, irregular nighttime rhythm. The building at night was not the building during the day. The temperature on every floor was slightly elevated. Not enough to trigger the HVAC alerts, a degree, maybe a degree and a half, but enough to notice if you were walking the corridors at 1 a.m. in December and expecting the slight chill that should come from a sleeping building's reduced thermal load. The air was different. Textured, the way it was in the penthouse. Holding scents that shouldn't have been there, cooking smells at 2 a.m., perfume in empty hallways, the faint chlorine trace of the pool on floors that were nowhere near the pool level. And sounds. Not voices, not yet, not on the lower floors. But the sounds of habitation. Faucets turning on in units where the tenants were confirmed asleep. Televisions murmuring through walls when the unit on the other side was vacant. The soft thud of a cabinet closing in an empty apartment. I checked the access logs every morning after these walks. The anonymous entries, the credentialless accesses that I'd first noticed on the 22nd floor, were now appearing throughout the building. Floors 6, 9, 12, 14, 17. The same floors where the former tenants had reported hearing their dead. The building was waking up. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. The way a neighborhood wakes up, one house at a time, one light switching on, one door opening, one voice rising, until the whole street is alive and humming with the accumulated activity of people going about their days. Except these people were not alive. And their days had ended years or decades ago. December 14th, retained, 23. I received an email from Alder's HR department informing me that my annual performance review had been completed and that I'd been rated, exceeds expectations, in all categories. My bonus was 15% above target. Sandra Chen had written a personal commendation noting my exceptional stewardship of a complex property during a period of elevated turnover. Elevated turnover. 23 people had disappeared into the building's substrate, and my employer was praising my management of the process. I almost laughed. Then I opened the attachment and found something that drained the laughter out of me entirely. The performance review included a section I'd never seen in any previous evaluation. It was titled Retention Interface Performance, and it contained 3 metrics. Awareness Threshold, achieved October 2024. Observation Compliance, 94%. Integration Readiness, pending. I read those 3 lines and understood, with a clarity that felt like falling, that my job had never been what I thought it was. Operations Manager. The title was accurate, more accurate than I'd realized. I wasn't managing the building's operations for the residents. I was managing the residents' operations for the building. Every move-in I'd facilitated. Every lease I'd processed. Every satisfied family I'd welcomed into a unit where the walls held breath and the closets smelled like the dead. I had been the intake system. The friendly face. The professional reassurance that everything was normal, the building was safe, the deposit was refundable. And now the system was evaluating my performance at a job I'd never been told I was doing. Integration Readiness, pending. I closed the laptop. I sat in my office in the dark, listening to the building breathe around me, because it did breathe, I realized now, a slow tidal rhythm in the HVAC that didn't match any mechanical cycle, that rose and fell the way a sleeping body's respiration rises and falls. I could leave. Pack my things, drive to a hotel, email my resignation, and never walk into the Belmore again. Nothing was physically stopping me. The building wasn't locked from the inside. My car was in the garage. The city was right outside, bright and cold and full of people living in structures that didn't remember anyone. But my mother's hairpin was in my desk drawer. And when I opened the drawer, it wasn't alone anymore. Beside it was a photograph. A Polaroid, slightly yellowed, with the soft color saturation of the late 1980s. It showed a woman standing at a window, a tall window, floor to ceiling, with a city visible behind her. She was holding a coffee cup and smiling at the camera with the unself-conscious warmth of someone photographed by a person she loves. The woman was my mother. The window was the south-facing window of the penthouse. The city behind her was Atlanta, but an older Atlanta, a skyline I recognized from childhood photographs, before the Midtown Towers went up. My mother had never lived in Atlanta. She'd never been to this building. The building hadn't even existed when the photograph was taken. But there she was. Standing in a room that wouldn't be built for 30 years, smiling, holding a cup that probably held the same black coffee she drank every morning of my childhood, looking exactly the way I remembered her looking when she was happy. I turned the Polaroid over. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Welcome home, Nina. Take your time. It is now January. I'm still here. I want to state that clearly because I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe is not the confession of someone who has been captured or coerced. I am operating under my own volition. I come and go from the building freely. I eat lunch at restaurants, I shop at stores, I visit friends. I am not a prisoner. But I am changing. The retained count is 31. I check it every morning the way I check the weather, a data point that informs my day without alarming me. I know which units have lost their tenants. I know the paperwork will be flawless. I know Kenji will lease the units again and new people will move in and some of them will stay and some of them will go and some of them will go in the way that the building means when it says go, which is not out the door but through it, into the warmth, into the layered air, into the accumulated memory of everyone who has ever stood at those windows and breathed. Marguerite is still in the penthouse. She is radiant. She has stopped mentioning Gerald because, I think, he is no longer a voice she hears but a presence she inhabits, indistinguishable from the apartment itself. I have not heard my mother's voice. Not yet. But the scents in my apartment have changed. My 14th floor unit, which used to smell like nothing, the clean, neutral absence of a new construction apartment, now smells like the kitchen in Savannah. Onions. Bay leaf. The particular warm oil smell of cornbread in a cast iron skillet. I find myself leaving my windows open at night even though it's January. Not because I'm warm. Because the building's breath, rising from below, carries traces of something I cannot name but recognize the way you recognize a song you haven't heard since childhood, not the melody but the feeling the melody carried. I could leave. I could report this. I could call the police, the health department, the media. I could tell them that the Belmore has consumed 31 residents through perfect paperwork and invisible doors and a capacity number that suggests it will not stop until it reaches 312. But here is what stops me, and I need to say this honestly because honesty is the only professional standard I have left. I don't want the building to stop. Not because I've been compromised. Not because it's controlling my thoughts. Because I have lived in institutional spaces my entire adult life, apartment complexes, office buildings, hotels, and I have never, not once, felt held by one. The Belmore holds its people. It keeps them. Not in the ground, not in the dark, not in suffering. In the walls, in the air, in the warmth, in the scent of lavender and pipe tobacco and crayons and cornbread. It holds them the way a family holds its dead, not by letting go but by refusing to. And I am the operations manager. My job is to keep the building running. To facilitate move-ins. To process departures. To route concerns through the established channels and ensure that the property performs as expected. The property is performing as expected. Last night I checked the retained field before I left the office. 31. This morning, it read 32. I haven't checked the move-out records yet. I haven't looked at which unit lost its tenant. I will, in a few minutes, because that's my job and I do it well and the building knows I do it well and the annual review confirms it. But first I'm sitting here at my desk, writing this, because I want there to be a record that exists outside the building's systems. A human record, written by a person who can still say with reasonable confidence that she is choosing to be here. That the warmth she feels is warmth. That the scent of her mother's kitchen is a gift and not a lure. That the difference between a home that keeps you and a trap that holds you is a difference she can still detect. I'm writing this because I'm not sure how much longer that will be true. The hairpin is in my pocket. I carry it every day now. It's always warm. And this morning when I breathed on my office window, just to check, just to see, there was already a circle of fog there. At my height. In my place. Waiting for me to press my face to the glass and look outside at the city one more time before I turn around and let the building show me what it looks like from the inside of the warmth, where everyone it loves is breathing together in a room that never runs out of space. The retained field blinks on my screen. 32. I should check which unit. I already know it's mine.